London and Oxford, fairly close together. Rome, pretty far away. That's not just a geography lesson. That's how, within AI, vector databases work and think. Every AI product that you use, be that ChatGPT, Perplexity, Claude, all use vector databases under the hood. And they store information in the same way a map works, by distance, by proximity, and by meaning. Let me explain in this video why that matters. Before we do that, let's just explain how traditional databases work. They store data in a really structured way. So if I'm searching for the term dog, that's an exact ask and I expect an exact result. And that's served as well in the last 50, 80 years, because we are normally dealing with transactional data where we need a specific answer to a specific question. Think around finance, payroll, marketing, sales. We want an exact response to make decisions. But with the advent of AI, we're using natural language to speak to models. And language isn't exact. We need AI to be able to understand human concepts so that it can bring back more human relatable content in response to our questions. In the case of that example that I gave, if I was searching for dog, maybe I'd want different types of dogs, I'd want different sizes of dogs, I'd want everything to know with the evolution of dogs in my answer. So back to our map. As we said, London and Oxford pretty close together, down in the southeast, Rome pretty far away. And that's important because within a vector database, things get converted to a number and get stored close to each other based on meaning and association. And things with different meanings get stored far apart, like London and Rome. And I've just said that within a vector database, we store things as numbers. But before we store something as a number, it's important to understand what we're storing. We're not storing individual words, we're storing chunks of sentences, paragraphs, and each of those numbers is stored within our database as a point within our map. And this is how AI finds relatable information. It searches within our vector database for a point and it returns things within that cluster. So not just the point itself, but the nearest neighbors that might be associated with that similar meaning. So you might be thinking, why do we need this database? We can just point AI at our PDFs, our emails, our documents. You could, but that would be so slow at scale. Think about any time you've gone to a website and you try to open a PDF or a brochure of a menu. Sometimes it takes a little bit longer than you'd expect. Imagine trying to do that for all the documents that you want to ask a question of. So what we actually do is we use something called an embeddings model. And that embeddings model's job is to convert things into vectors, aka take your PDF, chunk it into paragraphs and sentences, associate a number with it, and then store that as a point within our map. And then when you ask a question, we also use that embedding model to convert your question into a vector. And then we can query against our database and find that point on a map and bring back everything around it that seems like it has a similar meaning. So just a quick bit on the number behind the vector database. What does it look like? Well, in reality, it could be hundreds or thousands of numbers that represent a single point on a map. And that's because that single number needs to represent so much dimensionality when it comes to meaning. It will need to represent sentiment, subject, content, tone. And if I take an example of the food was great, but the service was terrible, in a vector database, that doesn't get averaged out into something mediocre. Each of the numbers within that represent one of the tones of sentiment. So that means I can store that sentence on a single point in the map, but where it's positioned in the map takes into account the terrible service, but the good quality of the food. And the database stores all of those as a number. So that means mathematically, it's super quick to query. When you put in your own question, that gets converted into a vector using the embedding model. What the vector database is looking at is the distance, the proximity, the location of your question versus the answers that are available in the database. So traditional databases find things by exact terms. Vector databases work more like a map. And that's the difference right there. Using a vector database makes AI seem like it understands you better because it's returning results with meaning that might not be exact, but is similar in terms of what you're asking for.
Lost my pen.